this is part 2 to my emetophobia story and how I was able to beat it. As if my experience in London wasn't bad enough, little did I know it was about to get a lot worse. For the rest of the year, I dealt with the fallout from London. Even though I was home and safe, I still had nausea. I wasn't able to work. I started to get scared of going out the house. I tried some homeopathy tablets, which sort of worked and got me out and about. I also began taking the contraceptive pill because I had begun a relationship with my boyfriend. Now, this is a warning to all emetophobia sufferers. If you have a fear of nausea or being sick or in general are just prone to anxiety, I beg of you, do not take the pill. Or if you're already on it, stop it as soon as you can. Granted, not everyone has bad experiences, but if you're currently on the pill and experiencing a lot of anxiety, maybe come off it and see what happens. Anyway, this is my experience. I was put on my first contraceptive, Cerazette, or Desogestrel, and I never actually realised that I had any problems with it until it was too late. Because I started taking it at a time when I was already prone to high anxiety and nausea, I hadn't realised that the contraceptive pill was actually giving me nausea. I thought it was just anxiety. I know now that if I had let my London anxiety be, I would have gradually gotten better. But instead, I started taking the pill and the side effects began to kick in. From January, I listened to my hypnosis tape religiously and I started to get better. Or so I thought. Bit by bit, my anxiety started to drop and I was able to go out and do things easily and enjoy myself. The only thing that bothered me, although not so often that I noticed it, were the episodes of almost debilitating nausea I would get now and then. I would mostly get them after eating or when my anxiety got too bad. They would last a few hours and then drop, and I'd be fine. It didn't bother me too much because I just thought it was me. I thought it was my regular anxiety. I hadn't seen the difference between the London nausea and the nausea I was now getting. But because these nausea episodes were so debilitating, I found that I was too scared to get a new job because I was worried that if I got a bad nausea episode in work, I wouldn't be able to duck out for a few hours to calm down. I always found that if I had a bad episode, as soon as I walked out of the situation I was in, the nausea would calm and I'd be fine. If I kept myself in the situation though, it would get worse and worse and worse, etc. By this point, my food portions had decreased by half. I was constantly feeling bloated, so I could never eat as much as I used to be able to. My weight dropped an entire stone. I wasn't able to eat out at restaurants because that included eating in public and not being able to escape when I needed to. I couldn't walk long distances by myself because my nausea would kick in. I mostly hung out at home, but wasn't too afraid to have the odd day out with my friends. My anxiety was still high, but I kept listening to my hypnosis tape and working through the nausea. I ignored anything that would cause anxiety and tried to get myself better. And I was getting better. Kind of. I remember at one point, late into 2017, I went to the mall with my parents and we ate out. Amazingly, my anxiety was relatively fine, and I actually managed to eat my entire meal for the first time since London. I was hopeful. Excited. A couple of days after, I was feeling so good with myself that I decided to walk all the way to my GP and pick up my contraceptive pills myself. The sun was shining, it was a beautiful day. It was about a 20-minute walk there, and miraculously, I managed it. I felt great. I picked up the pills and then started back. And then something happened. A trigger that set off a very, very sharp downward spiral to complete and utter hell. I started out of the GP building and up the hill. As I was walking though, I started to realise that I was overexerting myself and walking too fast to get up the hill, and because I was overexerting myself, I was getting nauseous. And then my brain suddenly screamed, "You're overexerting yourself! You're going to be sick!" And I almost gagged. By this point, gagging to me was utterly petrifying. I didn't know what to do. My brain went into complete blind panic. I was about a 15-minute walk from home, but that was too far. I was scared of being sick right that second, and there was nowhere to hide, nowhere that I could run to. I was on a big expanse of grass right by a main road, and all I could do was run to the nearest bench and attempt to get myself calm. And I tried so hard. I was shaking like crazy, hyperventilating, desperately digging my fingernails into my skin, hoping the pain would distract from the nausea. But the fact that I could possibly be sick was too much. I was terrified. I was terrified. So terrified, in fact, that I found I couldn't move. I couldn't move from that spot on the bench because I was positive that if I tried to walk again, I would be sick. I had, effectively, stranded myself. It started to get cold and windy, but I waited on that bench for about an hour and a half, trying to calm myself down. It wasn't working, so eventually I texted my dad and asked if he could pick me up in the car and take me back home. Texted because I couldn't talk for fear of being sick. He said that my mum had the car and that she would be back in another 3 hours. It sounds ridiculous now, but I was completely prepared to wait on that bench for the next 3 hours, no matter how cold I was. I couldn't move anyway. Luckily, my dad walked out to meet me and sat with me in silence for half an hour before we went to leave. I was terrified to move, of course, but I felt slight comfort in having someone with me. We walked back home, and I was fine. I made it back without being sick, and that should have made me confident. But it didn't. Instead, I started to go back downhill, rapidly. That incident had been so terrible that I became confined to my room because I was scared to leave it. I now refused to leave the house at all because I couldn't face being outside and having another incident like that happen. I wanted to be as safe as possible. Because of that, seeing any friends was out of the question. My food intake decreased even more, and my hips started to become bony as I dropped an entire dress size. I couldn't eat in front of my parents, instead having to take my food back to my room. The only way I was able to eat was by myself, whilst watching something to distract myself. Now my nausea episodes had gone from every once in a while to every single day. All day. I wasn't coping. I couldn't. And all I could do was lay on my bed and distract myself by watching cartoons, because they weren't stressful, and try to live with this overwhelming, debilitating anxiety and nausea. I said before that I'm not a crier, but to show how weak I was, I ended up crying 5 times in 2 weeks. I was absolutely hopeless. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I didn't know if I'd ever be all right again. I didn't know how to get myself better. I'd always been the upbeat, happy one of the family, but by this point, I wasn't even able to smile. Because I was dealing with crippling nausea all day, I was spending all of the effort I had left on trying to fight it, and that meant that I didn't have 1 ounce of energy to even pull a smile. I remember sitting in my room, looking out the window, and just feeling utterly trapped inside my own body. I would think of all the things I'd want to do if I was better, and some were as simple as just sitting in the park with a gingerbread latte, or just walking 10 minutes up the road to buy sushi. Small things, but ones I considered absolutely impossible at the time. In fact, here is an excerpt from my diary that I wrote at one of my worst points, because I thought writing about it might help. It didn't. My parents didn't know what was happening, and they didn't know how to help. They'd never seen me like this, and they didn't understand. And so I ended up with the classic response of, "Can't you just tell it to go away?" And, "Just be positive and you'll be fine." And, "Why are you always so sad? It's getting us down." And, "No one's going to want to spend time with you if you're always moping about." And, "You're just attention seeking." And, "You're worrying over nothing." They were criticising me for something that was completely and utterly out of my control, because they didn't understand. I knew they couldn't do anything, and all I wanted was their support. That was it. And luckily, once they understood, I felt less pressure, and it made it slightly easier. A few days later, my parents said that they'd heard about how my cousin had had a terrible time on the pill, and whether that could be the problem. I was doubtful, because at the time, I assumed it was just my usual emetophobia. And then they asked if I'd ever really had a good day on the pill without nausea. And thinking about it, I wasn't able to say yes. So, now that I was at my complete wit's end with nowhere to turn, I went to my GP for help. She was lovely and very understanding, and prescribed me domperidone for the nausea. I was doubtful, but it worked brilliantly. It not only took away the nausea when I wanted to eat, but also brought down all the anxiety I had while eating. And gradually, I began eating downstairs with my parents. I had asked my GP about stopping the pill to see what happened, and she said to try a week on the domperidone before going off. So during that week, I did some research, and it turned out that one of the main symptoms of my pill was nausea and anxiety. Fantastic! I also looked at accounts of women that had been on the same pill, and loads of women had had horrendous experiences with it, one labelling it the devil. I'm now inclined to agree. Knowing all this, I stopped the pill as quickly as I possibly could and waited to see what would happen. A couple of days later, it suddenly dawned on me that the nausea had stopped. It had stopped. I waited for it to appear. I tried to make it appear, but it wouldn't. And I have never experienced that type of crippling nausea ever since. It was all down to the pill. Please let this be a warning. I say again, if you are prone to emetophobia or general anxiety, please, 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 please stop taking the pill and see what happens. Like me, you might not even realise that it's causing a problem. See the final part of my story for how I got better.